Welcome to the Spiritual Unity Radio Network, a station dedicated to the concept that all manifestations of the divine are equally valid. Join Reverend Terry Power HP, Robin McKean, and all the hosts for programming covering a wide range of spiritual topics, right here on Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to an emerging forest, a safe place where we have the freedom to think about life without judgment. We take a look at society, we examine it, and we allow for the possibility of something new, something different. And now, here's your host, Alan Ritter.
Well, good evening. This is the 14th day of October, the second show of An Emerging Forest of October in 2018. And, of course, it's a little after 9 p.m. on a Sunday evening. And we're going to talk about a subject that's been in the news very prevalently or very much recently with the Supreme Court nomination, with Bill Cosby and his trial concluding a while ago, his sentencing a few weeks ago. And here to introduce our topic in a little bit more depth is Dave Miller. Hi, Dave.
Hi, thank you, Alan.
And I'd just like to bring our first caller on the air,
please,
so that whoever it is included.
Beautiful.
So, who's on the line?
Marcie.
Hi, Marcie.
Hi, Marcie. So I'm glad Marcie's on, and we hope to have a few others as well. And I think one thing you brought up, Alan, is that MeToo has been on the lips of many folks for, tomorrow will be 1 year ago that it was sent out as a hashtag. And that's when it reached something like 200,000 retweets, etc., in one day. However, the MeToo was actually coined in 2006. So a woman named Tarana Burke wanted to help the survivors of sexual violence. And she, at the time, was thinking along the African American community, the young women, and she was looking for empowerment through empathy, and she was trying to help a 13-year-old girl who had confided in her. And then in 2017, October 15, so again, it's 1 year ago, Alicia Milano encouraged the spreading using the current hashtag #MeToo. And it was to draw attention to sexual assault and harassment, so it included things more than just direct penetration and fondling, etc., but coercion of any kind in the workplace. And it has now grown to include males, myself included, who have had problems. When I was a teen, I was fondled inappropriately. And so one of the things I want to talk about today, for anybody who calls in, you're welcome to tell your personal stories and any thoughts, but also I want to see what people's ideas are on how we can set up the protocol for today so that we can eliminate or at least minimize the issues that have gone on. And that could be as simple as the hugging, what is appropriate in modern times. So that's where I'm setting the tone for today, but it will go wherever it goes. So hi, Marcie, how are you?
Okay.
Do you have anything in particular on this topic that you would like to share?
What I think is most important is that we make it not about gender.
Okay.
So I'm glad because there's just as many little boys as little girls being abused, practically. Okay. And it's not a new thing. And I also want to, which is important to me, is to understand that we need to empower people to be responsible for themselves and teach them how to defend themselves when they don't feel comfortable.
Okay.
A lot of times it's just because we don't speak up, because we think we have trust issues. It's not we have trust issues, it's that we don't trust our own knowledge of what is right or wrong anymore because somebody blurred those lines for us.
Excellent.
So
point.
We're taught not to trust who we are or how we feel about things. And what I want to see is that we stop it by teaching children how to trust themselves and to know that what they feel is important, and they need to be able to defend themselves in whatever way they can.
Part of what you relate, or what I relate to what you're saying is not just the sexual component, but bullying in school. Kids are put into positions where they are not able to defend themselves or they're not confident to speak out. So my question to you, Marcie, is does it belong to the parents who barely teach their kids about sex, or is it about the schools who should implement programs? What are your thoughts?
It has to be a community thing, because we can't put a burden. So we put a lot of burden on the school system, and we ask a lot of these people, and then we don't stand up for them as teachers. What is it we want teachers to teach? That's a good question. How much can they take over for the parents, because the parents are busy working? So there's got to be more. It's got to be community outreach programs. It's got to be.
Would that include things like billboards or radio announcements, public service announcements that say, you're a good person, don't let it happen to you, speak out about it?
That's always the good thing. It's multiple things, I think. And
what about a school counselor?
We have a tendency as people, we see things happen and we don't say anything.
There's a psychological phenomena for that. If somebody else will take care of it.
Somebody else will take care of it, or it's not my business, or I may get sued, or but and maybe we need to teach people how to do it so it's not like a confrontation. That what we don't want people, physically hurting other people, even in defense, even though it seems like the right thing to do. We can do this in a peaceable way. Say, hey, what's going on here? Because you might not understand what's going on there, but that's the problem. We don't want to be responsible for actions, and so it's how you approach, because you may not understand the situation, and what you see may not be what's really happening. But not to interfere. So it's teaching people how to interact without being confrontational.
So in some cultures, amongst the Native American and African cultures, they have a tribal system of elders where if somebody has done something wrong in society, they are brought in front of the elders to discuss it, and if a punishment is made, that will happen. But usually, they will be outcast, verbally or emotionally, and shamed for their action, and that tends to work. But we don't have a tribal council in the United States. That we don't have.
Well, wait a minute. I want to say something about that. There's also in Africa where what happens when somebody does something wrong, the community comes together to say that, to point out how good they are, and maybe you made a mistake. You're still worthwhile. I don't know that it's a good thing to outcast anybody. I don't want to exclude people because because any one of us at any point in time can appear to be doing something that may not be right, but is perfectly agreeable to the people involved, because there's reasons that it is that you as an observer, you don't know the whole story.
Would that be considered an act consensual as opposed to society not approving of it?
I think it's just not seeing the whole picture. Because a lot of things can happen in which you don't know how it got to that point. You just walk in on the point, and I put it on like I watched some interactions between a couple of people, and I jumped to conclusions because I didn't know the situation. I didn't know what they meant to each other. But these are consensual people. Children are different in that children can't necessarily consent.
Right. Well, you bring up a good point. And, when I was prepubescent, I'm trying to figure out if I was 10, 11, or 12. But, my mom worked craft shows, and there was a gentleman there who was a vendor, and we got to talking, and I was into HO trains and all, and he said, "Oh, I have a nice HO train set at my house. You should come, and you can enjoy it and play and blah blah blah." And my mom, being a very trusting person, said okay. And so she drove me to Princeton and dropped me off at this gentleman's house. Now, he brought me into the bedroom and we sat down and talked, and there were no HO trains. He pulled out some swinger magazines and whatever was current in the 70s and proceeded to put his hand down my pants and try to fondle me, at which point I knew whatever it was wasn't right, consent or otherwise, and his wife was in the kitchen cooking. And I stood up and said, I think we're supposed to eat dinner. And I was able to stop it before it got any further. But that was only part of it. I had to sit there through the dinner uncomfortably. I had to have him drive me home. I would not let him know where I lived, so I had him drop me off on the corner. But that was only the first part of it, because when I went inside, I immediately reported to my mom what had happened. My mom, being a pretty understanding liberal lady, chose to say, I'm sorry to hear that happen, and that was the end of it. And it wasn't until this Me Too movement that I realized she never reported it, which means that gentleman, in all likelihood, went on for who knows how many years and continued to do it. And who knows how many other young boys were put through that imposition and live with a scar as a result. Now, I've talked about it in counseling many years back, but it was only until this Me Too movement that I realized we aren't teaching our kids, or our parents aren't even supporting it. And the question is, are our parents not supporting it because they themselves were abused? Is it a cycle that's just repeating? Education in school barely talks about your body and sex education. It's gotten better in the last 30 years or 40 years, but are we teaching our kids what's appropriate, not appropriate for touch and how to report it? And are the kids being believed?
Okay. I can't speak to what we're doing nowadays, but I can speak to the fact that I was my dad's caregiver, and we would watch Oprah Winfrey at 4:00, and one day she had all the men that were abused, and that's all that was in the audience as little boys. And the reaction for my dad was like he knew about this kind of stuff when he was growing up, because he was also he was the prime suspect for pedophiles or children of single parents, because you have lost somebody, you've been abandoned pretty much by one of your parents. He talked about it. So we're talking about this is in the 30s, and he said that there was a guy on the block that would have the kids over, and they would drink and they would play cards. But his reaction was like all denial that he never went. But I know for a fact the people in his group, his friends, most of them became alcoholics. Most of them, some of them were abusive of their families, their wives, their daughters. And all that comes from having been abused. So
Sure.
and so in those days there wasn't any those things weren't talked about. Your feelings for that your desertion, your father dying wasn't discussed. You weren't even really allowed to be a part of the mourning process. And so
yeah, guys can't cry kind of thing. Sure.
And children just weren't available, and so these things are not new. These things are not unknown, but they weren't spoken about, and there was no. When I was growing up, there was no DIFUS and DIFUS. There was no 180. There was no safe place for people to leave. You were stuck. If your family had one car, you were blessed. You didn't, there was nowhere you could go. Women didn't really work in the workforce. They had just the women's job, things like a hairdresser and whatever, secretarial and things like that. And you were stuck with abuse. You were stuck if
so communication wasn't able to happen because we didn't have social media. You were lucky if you had a telephone, and there was one telephone on the wall.
And
where we are today.
And sometimes you even had a party line, and people don't know. People don't understand where we've come in a very short period of time. There was no cell phones. There was no, and you watched TV with your family maybe for an hour at night or 2 hours, and it was black and white. And I feel like I was in the Stone Age, but it wasn't that long ago.
Very true.
Most people didn't have color TV until, getting into the 70s, late 70s, and early 80s. That was a luxury. And
with TV, we didn't even have sex was not seen on TV, and then flash forward, Jerry Springer broke strides by having whatever is possible discussed about, and then you had Ruth speak about sex, and Oprah bring people on, and gay talk show hosts and all. We are at a point where communication is opening up, but it is taking a long time, and I don't know today where kids would turn to if they have two parents that are working. When do they have time to be intimate enough to talk to their mom or dad and say, I'm not comfortable with something that happened today at school. And I don't know where we're at about males being able to talk to their dad. My dad was old school. He was very uncomfortable talking about feelings, let alone anything else. So, everything I learned or associated was through my mom. And I don't know. I mean, we've got the feminine rising. We've got more males comfortable with themselves, just, being able to talk about things. But we're adults doing that, and I don't know what's happening with the kids today. I would love somebody to call in that is a current teacher. That would be great. And share with us what's going on in the schools, because I don't know what opportunities exist. And like you said, it's not.
This is a live program, and to call in and possibly address Dave's question, the number is 646-564-9714. Go ahead, Dave.
Thank you, Alan. On terms of things like harassment, have we changed what's considered harassment? I mean, we now have the term date rape. Sexual harassment obviously has been showing up in the news even more and more with celebrities and politicians being accused. One question I have, is there a timeline? That was brought up in the news. Is there a timeline where it no longer is considered significant to report? That was brought up for our Judge Kavanaugh. I mean, somebody said, well, that's too far past. It's not important. But it doesn't stop the person's memories or the PTSD, and the allegation is true or not, is still vivid.
I do believe there's, I think the only crime that doesn't have a termination is murder. You can be, if they can find you and figure out that you murdered somebody, there's no time limit. But okay. I think I think it depends on how that crime is rated.
So we consider murder obviously never ending because you'll track down the person at some point. But sexual harassment is considered lesser and okay to sweep it under the rug at some point.
Well, again, I guess it depends on the state, because I think that's the states regulate. If it's a misdemeanor, it's the length of time you serve, depending on what it is.
So I'm skipping over to a website that talks about the statute of limitations on rape. And from state law, you can just page through Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, no statute of limitation. Arkansas, 6 years for first-degree offenses, 3 years for second, third, and fourth. California, 10 years. Colorado, 10 years. Connecticut, 5 years, and on like that. So Delaware, no statute of limitations. Florida, no statute of limitations for sexual battery with physical force or deadly weapon, 4 years for first-degree offenses. So it varies widely, but a lot of states is no statute of limitation.
Okay, so that's good.
So
there is no statute of limitation.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to break for our break. Very interesting discussion, first program on this subject. And I'd like to play Dave the Bard, How and Toe. I'll be back in a couple minutes, everyone. Hang on there.